Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Castlevania Circle of the Moon. In the last part, we got into the machine tower area and pretty much reached the end of it in the process, and now it's more or less time for us to go after the boss fight. I say more or less because we actually have a DSS card to farm out first. Namely, there's a hidden passageway on this wall just above this fox archer. In here was not only an MP up, but also a Thunder Demon. This is the Thunder Demon I like to farm for the DSS card because getting in and out of this room is also very quick. We can also finally get the Cross Boomerang here, which is overall my favorite sub-weapon in the game. If placed properly, you can get 3 or 4 hits on an enemy at a time, making it very good for damaging them, especially in shooter mode if you're playing that for some reason or another. The card in question isn't also too terribly rare. It's a 3% base drop rate, so depending on your luck, you can easily get that to 6+%, meaning it'll drop pretty quickly. This took me somewhere around 20 Thunder Demons to actively have show up. This is the Manticore card, which is our Poison Elemental attribute card. This is one I tend not to use too often. When you pair it with Mercury, you actively get a Poison Elemental Whip that you aim upwards by default, and will actively drop 3 projectiles of poison that slowly come downwards. When paired with Venus, you actively double the amount of hearts you receive upon picking up any given heart, which is one of my favorite cards to use in the game long term, especially if you like using sub-weapons like I do, especially the Cross Boomerang or Holy Water. And should you pair Manticore with Jupiter, we get the effect we're currently seeing where Nathan emits giant clouds of poison smoke from his body. I'm assuming he's just real stanky. This doesn't do too much damage, but it can be good for taking care of some smaller enemies in the game, or I think it can also damage projectiles, but I seldom ever use it, so I don't actually know about that for a fact. Future me, can you go test that? I want a definitive yes-no whether or not they can actively destroy enemy projectiles or not. With that said, now it's time for us to go out of the way to do the boss fight, and I'm going to recommend you actively do something I don't here and go and get the Cross Boomerang from the room I just farmed the Manticore card, as I foolishly bring in the stopwatch, forgetting that it doesn't really work on bosses. There is actively a reason to bring a stopwatch into this boss room down the line, but that's a further 2 or 3 bosses ahead of where we currently are, so it is just not time for that yet. Bring the Cross Boomerang in instead, or the Holy Water would also be a very good option if you can find it somewhere here in the machine tower. The boss here is the very slow and lumbering, but very strong Iron Golem, who's going to be slowly walking in from the far right side of the arena. As it shambles towards you, the Iron Golem can just try to slug you outright with its fist if you're too close, but the main thing you're going to see it do a lot is do a downward slam with its fists, which will cause the gears on the ceiling to start falling in a random order. You can keep yourself safe from that if you actively spin your whip in place, but if you place yourself just right, you also don't need to worry about that too much to begin with. The really oddball attack this boss has is to heal itself for about 50 HP at a time across 10 increments of 5 HP or so. It's not the hardest healing to get around, but if you're not careful, it can outpace the damage you're dealing in some circumstances, especially if you're at a much lower level, or if you're not taking advantage of the DSS combos effectively, especially, say, the Venus Salamander one that boosts your strength. Good sub-weapon usage can also really make this fight much easier for you. Again, do not bring the stopwatch into this. Bring the Cross Boomerang or the Holy Water. That's going to be a lot better for you in the long run. You don't have too much HP to get through here, about like 640 or so, but if you're not careful, that fight can be a bit rough. And as you saw, if he punches you, you go flying pretty far. Hugh, are you alright? What are you doing here? Are you trying to take my glory? What are you talking about? I just want to save Master. You're in the way. I will defeat Dracula myself. And then, Hugh? Okay. Bye, jackass. Rude. For defeating the Iron Golem, though, our reward is our next movement utility, the Kick Boots. Jump against walls for extra height. Push forward and the special move button to execute. So this is Nathan's version of a wall jump, effectively, which you use by holding forward towards a wall and then pressing the R button. With that said, it's much closer to the wall jump from, say, Metroid Fusion, or I guess even technically Prime 2 and 3, in that you're always going off at a set 45-degree angle or so. If you are precise, you can use a double jump to either get back towards the same wall or get up to a really awkward angle in some cases to get higher than you're really meant to before getting a certain other movement utility. It's actually how you get the one specific item I was talking about, I think the last part, near the flame armor over in the Triumph hallway. But I'd really recommend waiting until you get the other notable movement utility that allows you to get up really quickly. With that said, we're now done in the machine tower at large. We are going to be leaving not through the main entrance we entered from, though. There's actually another door that leads into another part of the audience chamber I want to go to. More for map completion than anything, really. There's not really any enemy drops or DSS items I super care to farm out over there, and technically there's a room over there we can't even access until we get the aforementioned specific movement utility I've already been talking about a couple times. But grabbing those map tiles now means I won't have to later, and it does also get me closer to my next destination all the same, so it all works out. At this point though, let's start talking about some more of the game's dev team. We've already mentioned the lead as well as the 2 sound people, but next let's talk about one of the other people on the graphics team, specifically the person who was both the character designer for the game, did the player graphics, as well as did some demo graphics for the game, Kazuko Fujihara. This was actively their last game as far as I can tell, but they're also credited for character design on Poppin' Music on Game Boy, alongside one of the Game Boy Color Goemon games. They were on the graphic designer team for Rakuga Kids on the N64, but prior to that, before they were with Konami, they were seemingly with Falcom for a little bit, specifically doing art and graphics for both Revival Xanadu 2 Remix on the PC-98 and Brandish VT, the 4th Brandish title for the PC-98 as well. While we're in this room, 2 specific drops I actively want to mention. One is from the Hyena and one is from the Werewolf. The Werewolves is frankly not really worth it at a 1% drop rate, but you can actually get them to drop the wall meat item pretty much from the prior Castlevania games. If you use that, it heals 50 HP, which makes for a good stopgap if you don't have any actual potions. But the Hyena, that's what has a good one. At a 0.5% base drop rate for its rare drop, it can drop the Night Suit. That's not the strongest armor defensively in any regard. It actively only boosts your defense by 60, but it also boosts your strength by 20 and your intelligence by 10, making it a pretty good early game option if you can manage to get it. With that said, its drop rate from the Hyena in specific being 0.5% makes it really not worth farming from that specific enemy. There is a specific enemy down the line that has a much higher chance of dropping it. I think it's even their common drop technically. It's just a factor of whether or not you're going to want it at that point because it's later enough in the game where those defenses and boosts aren't going to be as notable as other things you can grab by that point. Either way, our next destination is to head back to the Abyss Stairway, that little transitional area that was between the catacombs at the start of the game and the audience room itself, specifically the first room we enter when coming from the audience room here. As there's a route there that we didn't take earlier because it required the kick boots to access, and that's going to lead us to our next main area. And one of the silliest areas in the game, frankly, although it is a bit of a reference to a specific part of Symphony of the Night, not for nothing. What makes this region very specifically funny that we're coming up to is that 80% of it, 90% of it is a complete straight line, very literally. It's one hallway. Welcome to the Eternal Corridor. Now, there are some pretty good enemies in here for experience or item farming, not for nothing. Heck, the Gorgon I just killed also has a 1% chance to drop the very same meat item I was talking about a moment ago with the Werewolf. And this is probably the better room to farm that in case you want to try to for some reason, but again, that 1% base drop rate, not very good. What we're actively more interested in here, potentially, if you want to get some good upgrades, is actively an enemy called the Flame Demon, which is quite the complicated enemy to avoid, frankly, because the way the Flame Demon in this game works is that it's going to either do a spread shot of shots around itself, or it's going to cause several large fire orbs to spawn and then just send them in every which direction it physically can. There it is. That enemy has a 2% chance to drop an armor known as a chainmail, which, while it doesn't have any bonus stats outside of its raw defense, it is a notable upgrade to pretty much anything you might have by this point, as it's a defense boost of 100. That's even more than some of the other armors along the bronze armor line. With that said, again, 2% drop rate, you gotta get a little lucky, but it's not the hardest thing to farm out in the case you really want to. Honestly, depending on your luck and level, that 2% can become a lot more likely very quickly, not for nothing. 2 new enemies here to really take note of as well are the Werebear and Beast Demon directly behind it. The Beast Demon sends out a giant arc of projectiles, but if you get right in front of it and crouch, most of its enemy line can't do much against you. Meanwhile, the Werebear moves slowly, but watch out! Its attacks hurt, and they have much more range than you might think they do. Its main attack is just to do a physical punch forward. Both of these do have some interesting drops as well. Namely, the Werebear has a 4% base drop rate for the Cotton Robe and a 1% drop rate for the Strength Ring. The Cotton Robe is a very weak armor, it's only like 20 or so defense, but it does boost your intelligence by 100, which can be really good for using spells regularly. Meanwhile, the Strength Ring boosts your strength by a whopping 50 or so, but I think it actively lowers your defense and int by some amount. I can't quite recall. Future me, grab that stat if you can. Meanwhile, the Beast Demons have a roughly 4% chance to drop the Arm Guard, which is another arm type equipment that just boosts your defense by 10 or so, I think. But they have a 1% chance to drop the Cursed Ring. That boosts your strength and defense by 30, but reduces your luck by 100. which honestly, in some cases, especially against bosses, is worth swapping to in the case you actively manage to grab one. I think there was an enemy that drops it more commonly down the line. But yeah, if you can grab it, might be nice. That actively used to be called the Ring of Varda back in Symphony of the Night, and it was ridiculously busted and raised pretty much every one of your stats by a ridiculous amount. But they aptly went, that was probably a bit too much, and made it a curse ring in pretty much every game moving forward, where it gives you some pretty good buffs, but also lowers your luck or some other stat by some amount. Now, I don't go out of my way to showcase this right now, but if you actively head to the left of where I am right now, there's actually another doorway you can enter over there on that level. It leads straight to another one of the Iron Maidens that we've seen a couple of at this point, so we can't do anything about that pathway for now, but soon enough, folks. In the meanwhile, let's keep talking about some more of the game dev team. Specifically, next up is the game's main programmer, Koji Yoshida, who's also listed as a system programmer and demo programmer for this very project. Prior to this, they were a planner and the outright director of Rakugo Kids for the N64. They were the director of the Japan-only puzzle spin-off for Goemon on the N64, and they were also a programmer on Beatmania Game Boy, as well as International Superstar Soccer Advance for the GBA and Formation Final for the PS2, meaning the last two games listed for them are actively soccer games. Now, worth noting, as far as I can tell, this is both not the Koji Yoshida, who's been a career programmer working on games like the original Dragon Quest and has enjoyed a lengthy stay at Capcom after seemingly starting with them on Samurai Sword for the NES, nor is this the Koji Yoshida who's largely worked with Sega, who started as a planner on Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz and has since been heavily involved through a majority of the Yakuza / Like a Dragon franchise, even directing the original Judgment spin-off. There is a chance I'm wrong, as my primary source for a lot of talking about dev team members is Moby Games, and they've been wrong about stuff before, as well as not linked to names properly before. But seemingly in this case, this is just a common enough name where there's just multiple Koji Yoshidas who are heavily involved in programming. Either way, we have shifted aesthetics as at the end of the Eternal Corridor, we reach our next destination, the Chapel Tower. This is our cathedral core area for the game like the one in Symphony of the Night. And this is also probably the best place in the game to farm up flame armors for the drops I mentioned that they had earlier in the game. Mind you, at this point, depending on what you've already farmed out ahead of time, it might not even be that good of a pickup anymore. Now, we actually saw one of my least favorite enemies in the game a moment ago, the Bloody Swords. They are swords that spin in place and then try to neum directly at you. Avoiding them isn't too hard. It's trying to kill them yourself that's a nightmare because the hitboxes on them are just kind of weird to read, and due to Nathan's already limited range outside of certain DSS combos, hitting them is just a bit of a nightmare. So would you believe we have to farm them because they themselves have a DSS card? Ugh. At the very least, they have a decent chance to drop the very arm guard accessory I was talking about earlier this very part, I believe. And if you get two of those, that's a decent defense boon all the same. It probably won't last you that long because there's some other really good armor you can find in the relatively near future, but for the meanwhile, it's nice to have. I am, of course, going to farm the DSS card from these Bloody Swords while we're in this area, but I'm not going to do it from these early Bloody Swords in the very first room here. There's actively some just outside the save point I believe I end this video at that makes for a much more efficient farming location. The Bloody Swords and Flame Armors are going to be what make up most of the enemies we see in the very early rooms of the Chapel Tower. We're not going to see a bunch of new enemies until the latter half of it or so. With that said, there is a hidden room we're going to see in a few moments that actively has a single hyena enemy in it. So if you want to go out of the way to farm that very low 0.5% base drop rate Night Suit item I brought up earlier, that's the place to do it overall, I find. As while there are rooms with more hyenas in it, having one that you can just quickly respawn within like 5 seconds and farm several a minute, it's probably your best location to do so, period. There is one other thing to the Bloody Swords that makes them very annoying in the rooms they're actively in, though, and it's, well, exactly what's happening right now. Depending on how you get hit by them, you might find yourself falling down further back into the room, and that's an annoying backtrack as it is, but the little corner I just fell into, as I showed off earlier, the only way out of there is actually by sliding and going back around the room to begin with. So if that happens a lot, it can get annoying very quickly, and not for nothing, the latter half or so of the Chapel Tower has a similar thing that can happen with a different enemy type as well. What is kind of odd thinking about it is that there are times where I think getting knocked back in this game in specific is actively much more annoying than getting knocked back in the classic Vanias, but that might be more a factor of exposure and control expectations, because I expect more smooth control out of a character in this specific genre, and Nathan just does not have that a lot of the time, honestly. And while a knockback instance in the classic Vanias can more easily make me lose a life, I think I'm just more used to that happening, thus more accepting of when it actively does happen. Now, this room in specific is actually one I could have just entered and left as well. I can come all the way up here for the stat max stuff that's at the top of this room. There's another one on the far left that I don't grab until later, and I forget if it's a factor of I just can't grab it until later, or if I can grab it now with good use of the kick boots and any kind of freezing whip, and I just forget to do so. There's at least one room that happens in, but I forget exactly where. As I've said before, I've played this game a couple times. This is probably now easily the Metroidvania, Castlevania I've played the least. And heck, that's even going to kind of showcase in how the LPs work moving forward for the rest of these games, because even if I don't, like, showcase the full playthrough, I do want to make a point to sample and showcase the extra player character modes that those games have moving forward. Especially in the case of, like, Aria of Sorrow, where that game's extra mode can be beaten within, like, 15-20 minutes if you know what you're doing, which I probably will do. Since here in Circle of the Moon, the bonus modes are entirely just changing up Nathan's stat pools in some way, making you play the game in different ways, I just don't find that as interesting because you can play the game like that to begin with, just it's not as easily focused on. Speaking of Metroidvanias, though, might as well talk about this to finish off the part. There's actually one I just finished for the first time last night on stream, specifically Axiom Verge 2. That was really good. I actively liked that a lot more than Axiom Verge 1. My biggest holdups is I think Axiom Verge 1 had better boss fights and generally had better atmosphere, but Axiom Verge 2's more varied environments and all that, I just preferred, ultimately. With that said, I think both games are pretty guilty of one thing in specific, and that's absurdly esoteric placement of certain pickups. As there's several you just kind of need to figure out that you can jump into a wall to find an item in, and I'm not the biggest fan of that. Which is actually something this game does in exactly one room as well. Also, really quickly, in this hidden room, there's actually an MP up alongside a Bloody Sword. I do attempt to farm this specific Bloody Sword for the DSS card for a little bit, but I think I only do like 8 or so kills before I give up and remember that the save point has like 2 right next to it, just ahead of us. So this room introduces us to this game's incarnation of the marionette or killer doll enemy in specific. And we're going to be seeing them through pretty much the rest of the Royal Chapel. What's really annoying about them is that if they physically touch you, they inflict the curse status upon you, which completely prevents you from attacking. Status ailments in this game, alongside most of the series, are temporary ultimately, but with cures in specific, you're probably going to want to have some cure curses on standby to cure, because not being able to attack is really rough in any circumstance. Thankfully, the marionettes themselves can also drop the curative item for curse, so that can come in handy pretty quickly. It's in their common drop slot too, at about a 4.5% base drop rate. Their rare drop is the Mind High in specific as well, which actively restores half your MP when you use that item. But that said, it is rare at a 0.75% drop rate, so 0.75%. Pretty hard to find. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 5, we're going to dive deeper into the Chapel Tower, finishing this area off in the process and moving on to our next one. See you guys then.